Welcome to the Music Treasury, rare and historic moments in classical music. I'm your host, Gary Lemco. And this evening, we're celebrating one of the great artists who died tragically young, the Romanian artist, pianist, writer, and composer, Dinu Lipatti. And with me is a guest, Mark Ainley, a commentator, writer, and lover of rare and historic piano albums and recitals. Mark, are you there?
Hello, yes.
Yes, we have you. Great. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Fine. You're calling from Vancouver.
That's right.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Tell us, Mark Ainley, how did you become involved with Dinu Lipatti, and what is it that has consistently drawn you to his art?
You know, I was in my teens when I started getting interested in historical recordings, when my piano teacher at the time showed me her closet full of 78s, and I saw, Rachmaninoff playing Rachmaninoff, and the whole concept of, composers playing their own works or people from a certain lineage playing music fascinated me. And when I was going through, secondhand shops and looking at records, I came across the name Dinu Lipatti. And particularly at my high school, I came across this record, an Angel record sampler that had an excerpt from Dinu Lipatti's last recital, and I thought, well, that's an awfully morbid title. And so I asked my high school music teacher what the deal was with this Lipatti fellow, and she said, oh, he was a pianist's pianist. And so I sought out everything that I could, and his biography intrigued me as much as his playing. And the more I listened, the more I thought, there really should be some more recordings of this guy. He died in 1950. That's not too late. There are broadcast recordings of other musicians from the 30s and 40s. So I started, they weren't showing up in secondhand shops, so I started taking matters into my own hands and started doing some research. And I had no idea what I was getting into because it was not as easy to find these things as I expected. But it's been fascinating, and I'm still absolutely intrigued by him as a person, as a musician, and his playing.
Fair enough. What is it about the playing that we should be listening for this evening?
His playing is utterly magnetic in many ways, and I think we could distill everything down to a level of poise that he has, whereby technically everything is seamlessly accomplished because he had more technique than he needed to play any piece of music. He had a very rigorous work ethic, and so he practiced endlessly until every physical challenge was overcome. Intellectually, he had a brilliant, as a composer himself, he brought brilliant insight into the music he was playing. He brought out the emotional content as well, and I think the fact that as a musician, as a composer, he was so focused not just on serving the composer and of playing this particular work, but on being a servant to music, that there is this overall wide-ranging, this sort of wide horizon of music itself, like the whole fabric of music being served through his interpretations, that there seems to be, even amongst amateurs who hear his recordings, there seems to be this magnetic quality to his playing that is absolutely riveting.
Well, it's a tough verbal description to follow, and I won't try to follow. Let's follow with the man himself. As you've suggested, we're going to open this tribute to Dinu Lipatti with one of the famous transcriptions by Myra Hess, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, in this performance by Dinu Lipatti. We've begun this tribute with the Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, and a transcription by Mara Hess for keyboard. It was from cantata number 147, from a 1948 performance, I believe. That was Dinu Lipatti, and of course I have to apologize already for an unnecessary repeat. Mark, tell us about Jesu.
Well, this was a piece, it was the leitmotif of Lipatti's life and career. It was the first piece of music he played at his first recital in Paris in 1935 because his composition teacher, Paul Ducasse, had died just a few days prior. And it was the last piece of music he played at his legendary final recital at the Besançon Music Festival in France in 1950. And he tried tirelessly to record the perfect version of it, and he made 7 attempts in 1947. What we heard is the 6th of those 7, which he consented to be released, but he still wasn't satisfied with it, and in 1950 he did another 7 or 8 takes and finally released another one of those. So we have 2 versions of him playing that. I prefer this earlier one because he's in the EMI studio with that wonderful, very responsive Steinway and wonderful microphones and engineers, who did a brilliant job with the sound. And in that in the coda of this particular version, we hear him highlighting a beautiful treble voice, which he doesn't do in the more famous later version. This particular version was never on LP, so it was only on 78 in 1947, and then it was unreleased again until 1999.
My goodness.
So, and it's truly wonderful playing, as is always the case.
Well, extremely lyrical. I mean, the arioso elements. Let me just mention parenthetically that my first album of Dinu Lipatti was, in fact, the 2 LP set of his last recital, which I found at Sam Goody's. Only because the cover art and the program looked so fascinating to me and so diverse, and of course hearing it play.
It's a fascinating story, and again, it's actually we're going to be playing. I think we're going to be ending today with an excerpt from that last recital. There's always a bit of a mystery when it comes to not just Lipatti's commercial recordings, but also the live ones and how they came to be found. And there was a bit of a story as well with that last recital, which I'll be sharing later on. It's a wonderful set, and is considered really one of the glories of the gramophone.
Well, let me switch the tempo as well as the timbre of the tribute this evening with one of the more virtuosic performances of Dinu Lipatti. Some people consider this to be possibly the most definitive of all performances of Alborada del Grazioso by Maurice Ravel from Miroir. I believe this performance comes from 1948. Is there something you'd like care to say about?
This was recorded, his final sessions at EMI Studios, the last time he made it to London before his illness took its grip. He recorded the Schumann Concerto earlier on in April, and then he recorded the Chopin Barcarolle and the Alborada del Grazioso. And this Ravel is apparently the only recording with which Lipatti himself was fully satisfied. And it is this recording which, in a sense, launched me into my quest to hear more recordings by Lipatti, because the general consensus, the stories that we heard and read in liner notes, was that he was this weak, ill pianist, who was so sick at his last recital that he couldn't play the last Chopin waltz, and there was this melodramatic tale, in a sense, that had been sold and repeated. And then I heard this performance, and it just did not compute, because the virtuosity is off the charts. He's got tremendous power, and the playing, it's so creative. Technically, I mean, it's beyond what anybody else has managed. The repeated notes are so incredibly rapid that apparently at some recitals he would tell the piano tuner that the piano wasn't responding quickly enough, and the tuner just said, "Well, it's not my fault. You're just playing too fast." But the scorching glissandi that he does at about 4.5 minutes through the work, which are in thirds and fourths. I mean, it's just virtually impossible. And on that last one, he just goes up and brings it into, he lowers the volume as he does this. And these are unedited performances, so there's no tape splicing. It was, what we hear is exactly as he played it. It's absolutely staggering pianism.
Well, after the word absolutely, I cannot speak. Alborada del Grazioso, number 4 from the set of Miroir by Maurice Ravel. Our pianist is Dinu Lipatti, and hold on to your hat. Well, if you still have your hat on, I don't know why. From 1948, the fourth of the Miroir set of Maurice Ravel, the so-called Song of the Morning Jester, Aborata del Grazioso, as performed by Dinu Lipatti, and makes me just very sad, almost a sad bird, that he did not record the complete suite. Mark, that was quite spectacular.
I mean, it shows a completely different side of Lipatti's playing. It's, a lot of musicians are really at the mercy sometimes of recording executives or circumstance or whatever determines what works they record. And for many artists, including many of the great ones whose recordings we know and love, and even if they recorded a lot, they did not necessarily record a comprehensive cross-section of their repertoire. And that's particularly true with Lipatti, who played quite a bit of Ravel. He recorded primarily Bach, Mozart, Chopin, with a couple of other things here and there. And this sole Ravel recording of his is, well, as we heard, I mean, it's just completely off the charts, incredibly imaginative. And then the execution is simply stellar.
Well, tell us how you'd like to proceed. Yes.
I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say, tell us how you'd like to proceed. Are we going to continue now with the more of the so-called virtuosic aspects of Lipatti, or do you want to get to the more meditative aspects of his style?
Well, I thought what we would do is actually compare, because, he's most known for his recordings that he made in 1950. And the story is that, he was suffering terribly from Hodgkin's disease. And so about a month after he recorded that Ravel piece, he played the Bartk concerto, which we'll hear an excerpt of later, and then he played practically no concerts he played a handful of concerts for a year and a half. And when cortisone injections were giving him some vitality, recording equipment was sent to Geneva instead of him going to London. And he recorded, a couple of hours of works there, and those are the recordings that are most known. But he recorded the entire cycle of Chopin waltzes there, but, the studio was rather small. He had two pianos there, a full grand and a short grand, and it's not clear which ones he used. That's unclear. But the overall sound of the piano in that cycle of Chopin waltzes is very different than in the recordings we've heard so far. And I wanted to highlight the difference by comparing the 1950 recording of the second waltz, the A-flat waltz, Opus 34, number 1, with a recording of the same piece that Lipatti had made in 1947 when he recorded. It's actually on the same day that he recorded the Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring that we heard earlier. Because the readings they're so similar, you can identify the playing as being by Lipatti, absolutely, in both of them. And we can hear similar touches and similar nuancing. But the second one that we're going to hear the 1950 version first, which is a little bit more salon-like and quaint and charming. The earlier version has a lot more fire and bravura and dashing, daring, bolder nuancing. And I think it's I wonder how much his playing changed as a result either of medication or just of his having suffered for so long, or whether it was just the recording ambiance that showed a different side to him. And this is why I think, in a sense, in the public ear and eye, he's been seen by some because of his illness and because of these recordings, I think, which are a bit boxier and acoustic. I think he's been heard as a little bit more small scale than he actually was.
Fair enough. Well, we're going to hear two performances of the same waltz by Frédéric Chopin, that in A-flat major, Opus 34, number 1. The first from 1950, and the second a few 6 seconds shorter, a little more brisk performance from 1947. Once again, our pianist is the great Dinu Lipatti. You've been listening to two consecutive performances of the Grand Valse Brillante, Opus 34 No. 1 in A-flat major by Frédéric Chopin. The first performance by Dinu Lipatti from 1950, the second from 1947. We'll continue this tribute to Lipatti in a moment, just a couple of announcements of upcoming concerts. On Friday, March 24th, the San Francisco Symphony performs Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra with John Cage's The Seasons and Robin Holloway's Europa and The Bull, a work commissioned by the Symphony. For tickets or information, call 415-864-6000. That's for this concert of March 24th of music by Cage, Bartk, and Holloway. Or you can go to sfsymphony.org and get information about this upcoming concert. The San Francisco Symphony performs Rachmaninoff's Symphony No. 2 and Prokofiev's Piano Concerto No. 2 with pianist Denis Kazukin on Friday, April 21st at San Francisco's Davies Hall. Once again, for tickets or information, call 415-864-6000 or go to sfsymphony.org for information about this upcoming concert by Denis Kazukin playing the second G minor concerto of Serge Prokofiev. I want to remind you that after the Music Treasury this evening, you can hear Megahertz. I understand Raimundo might be ill. There might be a substitute from 9 till midnight, so you just have to stay tuned and see what the deal is. In the meantime, we welcome back Mark Ainley with his commentary on the great Romanian pianist Dinu Lipatti here on the Music Treasury. Mark, that was spectacular Chopin.
And both of them are so wonderful, and both of them are, great music can be played in more than one way.
Yeah, each has its own sensibility, I would say.
And, that waltz lends itself beautifully to that first reading that we heard of Lipatti's, which was, in fact, the second recording he made from 1950, which is more quaint and, a bit more charming. And then, that one that we just heard is so much more adventurous and, daring and dashing. And it's a very different reading. And both of them work wonderfully. But we get more of a taste of, I think, the fire that Lipatti had when his health was not compromised. And as well as, did you notice how he sometimes there was this lift, he would just break and he'd stop at the end of a phrase before, he'd clear the sound from the piano before dropping down in again to play something. Some very bold gestures, I think.
What staggered me was the shoulder and wrist action that I was hearing at the keyboard.
He had tremendous technique and tremendous weight. And this is the thing, he was not a big-scale guy physically by any stretch, and yet he could certainly produce a massive sonority, as we heard, of course, in the Alborada del Grazioso, and then particularly in that second version of the waltzes where, he's got that wonderfully responsive Steinway piano at the Abbey Road Studios. We just hear that incredibly massive bass sonority that he was able to produce. It's a fantastic piano.
Tell me how we proceed. Did you want to continue with his work with Chopin, or would you like to go back?
Yeah, I thought we would listen to just a short excerpt from the Chopin Third Sonata, the second movement. This was the only large-scale solo work that Lipatti recorded at the Abbey Road Studios. And it's really quite unfortunate because at that time in his repertoire, he was playing in concert the Schumann Etude Symphonique, the Beethoven Waldstein Sonata, the Ravel's Tombeau de Couperin. He would sometimes play all of these works in the same recital. And but at the time, it seems that because of budgetary issues in post-war England, there was material shortage, and then they were also looking, I suspect, at the financial viability of selling recordings. That it was easier for people to buy single discs than to buy albums of larger works. And so when you look at the recordings of Cortot and Mazejevich and other established artists, they too only tended to record one large-scale work per year, and the rest were sort of single disc works. And what's unfortunate for Lipatti is the fact that this, in a sense, worked against him, that this is when he started recording at EMI, and so he only recorded this one large-scale work when he was in vibrant health. It's been a classic ever since. It won the Grand Prix du Disque the first year that it was awarded in 1949, and we're going to hear the second movement where we hear the incredible clarity of his touch. So many pianists will just put the pedal down to sort of obscure and, just in case there isn't the evenness of fingerwork. And they might just do little touches of it. Lipatti, in fact, his pupil, Belashiki, told me, had made an alternate take of this movement with no pedal whatsoever. But unfortunately, no test pressings have been located of that. So he is using a bit of pedal here, but it's always just the right amount. So why don't we give a listen to this?
Well, instead of le mot juste, we have the pedal juste. From the Sonata number 3 in B minor, opus 58 of Frédéric Chopin, we have the second movement, Scherzo. Once again, our pianist is Dinu Lipatti. Actually, I'm waiting for him to play the next chords of the slow movement. Remarkable.
I know. It's as I said, his playing is so magnetic. You just want to keep listening, don't you?
Really, I really do. Especially that largo with its drooping figures. It's itself is mesmeric. That was the Scherzo movement from the Sonata number 3 in B minor, opus 58 of Frédéric Chopin, in a performance by Dinu Lipatti. And again, the finger work and the execution, the lift is all combined to make I'm running out of words here. A truly elucidating reading.
There's such rhythmic momentum, isn't there? I mean, it's his metrics are so on. I mean, he's really he never loses the beat, and yet you always feel that propulsion onto the next beat. It's absolutely incredible.
Well, I think propulsion would definitely define the next piece. If I'm correct, that you want to move into a rare performance of him in a Bach concerto. Yes.
Well, this is a real departure. Now, again, when I got interested in historical recordings and I started, listening to Lipatti recordings, of course, I was hoping that there would be more performances than what was available on EMI. And I heard of this Bach D minor concerto concert performance. And so I just assumed that, I'm sure there are going to be lots of other records of concert recordings by Lipatti, but that was not the case. This is the only concerto performance by Lipatti that circulated on a bootleg label. And the story behind it is that Gregor Benko, who founded the International Piano Library, which then became the International Piano Archives, he did a tape exchange with a Swiss collector, and one day, this Lipatti Bach D minor concerto recording came from a concert in Amsterdam in October 1947. Gregor eventually, he lost touch with his collector and didn't know that the same night Lipatti had also played in the same concert. He had also played the Ravel G major concerto. So no trace of that recording has ever been found.
Oh my gosh!
So this is the only sort of a private recording, in a sense, of a concerto that actually circulated and was released. And it's so different than our perception, I think, of Lipatti, in a sense, our perception of Bach, in that Lipatti's playing the Busoni edition, which extends certain sections up an octave, down an octave. He really exploits the tonal and dynamic range of the piano. And because Lipatti always played so cleanly and so perfectly, and everybody speaks of his good taste, everything we've heard so far has been so pristine, in a sense, that we don't think of him being so unconventional, that this is an incredibly unconventional performance of the Bach D minor concerto. And his rhythm is very pronounced. He really, what's most mesmerizing for me is a section in the first movement that we'll hear where he goes in, he creates a decrescendo effect while you hear the chromatic progression of Bach's writing. And it really creates this melting effect, but he gets so soft with his playing that all the audience noise in the Concertgebouw just comes to an end, and you can just hear the audience almost on the edge of their seats. Lipatti wrote that he felt it was more important to be faithful to the ur spirit of a score than the ur text. And had he lived, I think there would have been some very interesting discussions and debates with the original instruments folks, because he was very much forward-looking and said that any music that continues to be played after the time in which it was written never conformed to begin with to the rules and regulations that were in use at the time that music was written. And certainly this is a very modern performance of Bach, that also one that reveals the genius of Bach's writing and the potential for playing that kind of music on the piano.
From the Piano Concerto No. 1 in D minor, BWV 1052, we hear a live performance from October 2nd, 1947, the Concertgebouw Orchestra of Amsterdam, under the direction of Edward van Beinum, and our pianist is Dinu Lipatti. October 2nd, 1947. From the Concertgebouw Orchestra of Amsterdam, we heard Edward van Beinum conducting and Dinu Lipatti at the keyboard. In the first movement, Allegro, from the Piano Concerto No. 1 in D minor, BWV 1052 of Johann Sebastian Bach. Of course, there was a deal of clatter from the original acetates, but nevertheless, a performance of astonishing vitality and elan. Mr. Ainley.
He was in very good health at the time. He had just recorded the Grieg Concerto a couple of weeks previously, and as I said, he played the same concert on October 1st and October 2nd with the Bach D minor in the first half and the Ravel G major in the second half. He was in very good health. It would be really he's in such fine form here. It would be magnificent if the Ravel G major concerto, of course, turned up. Having heard that Alborada, we can only imagine how brilliantly he would have played that. But at the very least, hearing him in this very creative and imaginative and modern approach to the Bach D minor concerto, it really, I think, shines a somewhat different light on Lipatti's interpretative philosophies.
Now, I don't want to spend a great deal of time with this side quest, it's a parenthetical issue, but how would you compare, let's say, Glenn Gould and Lipatti?
There have been a lot of comparisons between the two of them, and I think part of it is the fact that they could both be so very clear in their articulation and their voicing, as well as the fact that both of them actually really loved making recordings. And Lipatti apparently said to his recording producer, Walter Legg at EMI, that he wanted to give up concerts and just record. And if only Walter Legg had actually taken him very seriously and done that. But there's a very big difference in philosophy, I think. Now, I heard from somebody in the know recently that I don't know if you've heard Glenn Gould's recording of the Chopin Third Sonata, but it's let's just say it's very individual for sure. But apparently Gould himself said he wanted to see what he could get away with, and that's not at all what Lipatti would do. Lipatti was in it solely to serve the piece of music, the composer, and music all at the same time.
Well, so in that sense, pardon me, but
I wouldn't say that necessarily Gould was necessarily going to do that in every interpretation that he did. But I think that although we can recognize Lipatti's playing instantly when we hear it, just like we can recognize Gould's playing, I think, just about instantly. A very unique sound and touch and approach. Lipatti still puts the music in the foreground, and I think that Gould's eccentricities sometimes are a little bit more in the foreground. So very different approaches. Of course, both very wonderful, wonderful interpreters, great musicians. I think, but I'm personally more aligned with Lipatti's approach at what is at the heart of this music, and not just doing something new because we can do something new. He's doing something new because wants to reveal really what's at the essence of the score.
Well, let's listen. We only have 2 minutes left in this first hour tribute to Mr. Lipatti. What would you say to listening to the third movement excerpt from the Liszt Piano Concerto No. 1 to finish up this hour?
Yes, let's do that. Now, this is a fascinating story because, of course, Lipatti only recorded 2 concertos at EMI, the Schumann and the Grieg, which are kind of, mainstream concertos. And so when the Bach D minor showed up, on bootlegs, that was fascinating. And of course, EMI found a Mozart concerto and a Chopin concerto, the latter of which we'll talk about in a little bit. But this Liszt concerto, most people didn't even know that he played that because he doesn't come across as a virtuoso pianist in the public perception based on what he recorded. As I said, most artists recorded a very limited cross-section of their repertoire. And I found out in 1991 from Lipatti's biographer, Grigori Bartk, who lives in Paris, who's been a great help for me in my research since we were first corresponding in 1989, that a collector in Switzerland had showed him and played him this recording that he had of Liszt's First Concerto, which was recorded from a Swiss broadcast in 1947. And he had gotten these acetates directly from Lipatti's widow, Madeleine Lipatti. And of course, the question then is, how come these were never released? It's still a bit of a mystery, except for the fact that the first record itself was cracked. And technically, they weren't using computer editing at the time. She died in 1983, and at the time, I suspect that there wasn't the really very good technology to recuperate, and be able to work with these discs. But when I went into the EMI archives in 1991, there was not a shred of information about the existence of this recording, and no communications between Madeleine Lipatti and Walter Legg, unlike the case of these other concertos that had been discovered. And here we hear really the virtuosic bravura, fiery side of Lipatti's playing. This is a few months before he recorded the Grieg concerto. He was in pretty good health. He was having issues, but he was able to certainly, pull the stops out and play very, very well. And what we're listening to here is a unmastered version of the third movement. I managed to help coordinate the first release of this recording in 1995. I was living in Japan at the time while my colleague was in Germany, and we, in those days there was no computer files, no internet, and so, he'd send tapes and we'd check things. But one of his colleagues did a final remastering on it, which I hadn't heard, and I think killed a lot of the treble. And I recently got from my colleague the unfiltered version, and so that's what we're going to hear. So we're going to be able to hear, I think, a lot more of the bounce and the sparkle in Lipatti's playing. And one thing to pay attention to is the really growling, sinister voicing that he brings to that first movement cadenza with these oscillating trills that really build up into a crescendo and go down in this very really arched phrasing in that sinister melody. It's really dramatic playing, which Lipatti himself said was influenced by hearing Liszt's student Emil von Sauer play these concertos in Paris in the 1930s when Lipatti was there as a student studying with Cortot. So,
well, let me get this in. You're listening to KZSU Stanford 90.1 The Music Treasury, and you're about to hear the third movement from the Liszt Piano Concerto No. 1 in E-flat, from performance with Ernest Ansermet and the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande from 1947. The pianist is Dinu Lipatti. That was the third movement from the Piano Concerto No. 1 in E-flat major by Franz Liszt. The motto, of course, is none of you understands this music. Perhaps none of us does. That was Ernest Ansermet conducting the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande from 1947 in an actual acetate original, an unfiltered recording of that performance. Mr. Ainley.
Yeah, I mean, really dramatic Liszt playing, and it just shows that Lipatti was a fantastic Liszt pianist. He played the work in Bucharest with Wilhelm Mengelberg, who, when Lipatti walked on stage, said for the rehearsal, said, "Das ist kein Lisztspieler," this is no Liszt pianist. But then, as soon as Lipatti played the opening chords, he changed his mind. And so, Lipatti recorded only one Liszt work, a poetic one for EMI.
Sonata number 104,
number
the Petrarch Sonata, yeah. But let me mention...
But what we've got lined up now is
Mark.
two other Liszt performances that I helped to discover, one of which is a 1941 test recording made in Bucharest when he was 24 of Gnommenreigen, and the one after that is La Leggerezza. And in both of these, we really hear the more virtuosic, but still musical playing that Lipatti, that approach that he brought to everything he did. So incredible finger work, but the technique, he's not playing just to dazzle, but that happens. His Gnommenreigen is the only one where, as the work draws to a close, he highlights this left-hand motif with this bounce that really does sound like the title, the theme of the title, which is the dance of the gnomes, the dance of the dwarfs. So really amazing, virtuosic, intoxicating playing.
Yes, I just wanted to mention parenthetically that when Mengelberg made his debut with the Concertgebouw before becoming its conductor, he played the Liszt E-flat concerto. And,
did he really?
And he himself was not exactly a monster in terms of physique. But at any rate, that's so it's kind of interesting. Let us hear from the courtesy for Mark Ainley, two concert studies by Franz Liszt, which were not included in the usual discography of Dinu Lipatti. Concert study number 2, the Gnommenreigen, Dance of the Dwarfs or the Gnomes. Concert study number 2, La Leggerezza. Missing its first two bars, this piece is basically a study in the study of light touch. Two concert etudes by Liszt as played by Dinu Lipatti. reverse order, we heard La Leggerezza, the study in lightness of touch by Franz Liszt, with a couple of bars missing, and earlier than that, Nomenregen, the Dance of the Gnomes, two concert studies by Franz Liszt as performed by Dinu Lipatti and not part of the canon of Lipatti recordings. We have to thank Mark Ainley for that one. Thank you very much, Mark.
Well, I mean, I'm delighted. It was really, especially La Leggerezza, was quite accidental. I was looking at the National Sound Archive in London, and I just had the idea that I should probably check, I was looking at the card catalog back then. Nothing was, computerized. And I just thought, maybe I should look under the names of the pieces that I know Lipatti played and broadcast, and in case they're not cross-referenced. And sure enough, this La Leggerezza showed up from a BBC broadcast. It was listed in their card catalog under Liszt, but not under Lipatti. And then the BBC let us release it in 1995. It's the only time it was officially on CD, and it's truly amazing playing. Lipatti had recorded it for EMI in 1946, but there was a problem with this new materials that they were using for the stampers, and so he re-recorded all of the other works from those sessions except for La Leggerezza. So unfortunately, that's not part of his official EMI discography.
Well, we've had two wonderful Liszt performers in a row. Last week we had Georgi Zifra, this evening Mr. Lipatti. And of course, we can only wish that he'd done the second concerto as well.
Indeed. Well, he did play it. And he played it, in 45, 46 or so. So it's not impossible that broadcast recording should have survived. So fingers crossed.
Fair enough. I understand you'd like to segue into music from his native country, a little bit of Georginescu.
Yeah, I thought we would listen to this. This is one of the earlier recordings, in a sense, official recordings we have in his discography, although it comes from a broadcast made in Switzerland in October 1943, just a few weeks after Lipatti went to Switzerland, ostensibly for a short term, and then he ended up staying there for the next 7 years, and that's where he died. He did a broadcast at Radio Bern of Enescu's Third Piano Sonata, and this was first released in the 1950s. And when I went through the EMI archives, there was no sign whatsoever about how the recording turned up, which is very frustrating because at the same broadcast, he also played Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata. And so it's still really a bit of a mystery as to how the Enescu got into was found, and why the Waldstein wasn't. There are still perpetual rumors that there's a Lipatti Waldstein recording out there, and it's been 30 years I've been looking for it, and I'm not going to give up. But this Enescu is really marvelous because the way Lipatti he brings such wonderful color and rhythmic vitality to the music. And one important note is the version that we're hearing, the sonata is in D major, but all of the EMI pressings on LP and CD have been at the wrong pitch. They've all been a semitone sharp. And so we're going to listen to it today on key, in D major, as it was played and as it should be heard.
Well, this is going to become one hot pirate recording. The Sonata number 3 in D major, sometimes given as Opus 25 of Georginescu. In this performance, our pianist is Dinu Lipatti. Yeah, I wanted the decay on those notes to be quite clear. That music that you heard with its allusions to, I think, both Ravel and Debussy in the passing of its Agagics was music of Georginescu, the Piano Sonata No. 3 in D, its opening movement, Vivace con brio, as performed by Dinu Lipatti. But right now you're listening to the Music Treasury. My guest is Mark Ainley, and our discussion is about the great Romanian pianist Dinu Lipatti. Well, that was wonderful as well, Mr. Ainley.
Well, I mean, Lipatti was so clean as a pianist, and his technique could allow him to do anything that he wanted, and he put it solely at the service of the music. And so when it comes to complex music like Enescu, or really, we don't have enough recordings of him playing 20th century music, but that's kind of what we've just heard and are going into now. We hear how clear and the wonderful tonal effects he can create with just the right amount of pedal and finger technique, and really stunningly wonderful playing. And that takes us into the Bartk that we're going to hear now. Lipatti didn't record, as I said, he only recorded the Grieg and Schumann concertos, but he did play, he played 23 concertos for piano and orchestra. Well, not all concertos, but works for piano and orchestra. And the Bartok Third, he played the Swiss premiere. And there were rumors about it for decades, and somehow a broadcast tape never found its way into the piano fan trading network, even though the German radio had this recording of Lipatti playing the Bartok Third. EMI was in discussions to try to release it in the 1960s and 1970s, but it was quashed for two reasons. One, because Paul Zacher wasn't happy with his own conducting. But then there were some problems with the tapes, and if you would actually just play this little section from the first movement that we've got lined up, our listeners will be able to hear what the challenge was.
Okay, we're going to hear the first takes, I suppose, of the Bartok Concerto No. 3, with Paul Zacher conducting his own orchestra, I guess it was the Lausanne Chamber Orchestra, or one of those groups. Hold on, I can be more exact than that. It's with the orchestra of the Southwestern German Radio under Paul Zacher. And we're going to hear it with bleeps, and then we're going to segue directly into the second movement, the nocturnal movement of the Piano Concerto No. 3 by... Well,
in that case, if you're going to segue into it, I thought we would just listen to just that little section, just with the bleeps first.
Okay.
If you could just play that first, and then we'll talk a little bit before we hear the second movement.
Fair enough. Bartok with bleeps. Mr. Ainley.
Yeah, so the deal is there was some kind of electromagnetic interference or something with the master tape, and nobody was able to figure it out. But in the first movement, there was all these electronic bleeps over it, and in the 1960s, there was just no way for them to edit that out. So that was one of the reasons that the tape never came out. But, of course, once we got our hands on it in the 1990s, with computerized, micro-editing, we were able to do that. And Paul Zacher, in the 1990s, when we were in touch with him, he thought that, he wasn't very happy with the performance overall, that the second movement was very beautiful, and he allowed us to release that. And that's what we're going to listen to now. And what we can really appreciate here is how Lipatti doesn't have dissonant notes clash with one another, but he places them on different sonic planes so that we hear the tension between these two notes that would, by harmonic standards are dissonant, and yet they somehow don't sound dissonant. We are anticipating the next note, which is going to resolve and which is going to sound more harmonious. It's truly amazing playing by the great Lipatti.
The second movement, Adagio Religioso, from the Piano Concerto No. 3 by Bela Bartok. Once again, Bolzaka leads the orchestra, and our soloist is Dinu Lipatti. From the archives of the Southwest German Radio under Bolzacher, we heard the second movement, the Adagio Religioso, from the Piano Concerto No. 3 of Bela Bartok. Our pianist has been Dinu Lipatti. Mark Ainley, that was quite haunting.
Well, I mean, this was really, very moving playing. This is, as I said, I think the last concert that Lipatti played for 6 months or a year. And so he really actually was in very poor condition at the time, but certainly here we hear that the depth of emotion that the Bartok also had when he wrote this piece, knowing that he was dying, and having dedicated it to his wife. But the chorale-like section that opens with is very much like Bach, isn't it? And Lipatti having such a fine way with Bach as well, I think he brings out the clarity of and the beauty of Bartok's writing really quite wonderfully.
Now we've scheduled the first movement of the Concerto in E minor of Chopin, which has its own history, rather scandalous in certain respects. If we play that whole movement, we're going to somewhat intrude.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yes. Why don't we skip ahead to track 12 on the CD that I sent you? What we'll do is we'll listen to an excerpt from the second movement of the Chopin Concerto, because this is a really important story. It was one of the great scandals of commercial recording history that in 1966 EMI issued a tape ostensibly of Lipatti playing the Chopin E minor Concerto, and in 1981 when they reissued it, a very astute listener in England wrote to the BBC saying, well, it sounds awfully like this recording that I've got of Halina Czerny-Stefanska playing that concerto, and they did a side-by-side comparison, and sure enough, it was the same recording. So for 15 years, EMI had been making money off of a Lipatti recording that wasn't a Lipatti recording. At that time, a Swiss collector, the same collector who had the Liszt concerto acetates, he stepped forward with a tape recording he had made in 1951 from a collector who had recorded this 1950 Zurich concert, an authentic Lipatti performance. And he recorded it with a handheld microphone on a reel-to-reel recorder. And that was the tape that EMI would eventually issue in 1981 with Otto Ackermann conducting the Zurich Tauernhalle Orchestra. Now, the sound, as you can imagine, given the source of the recording, was absolutely abysmal. In the 1960s, Lipatti's widow, Madeleine, and recording producer Walter Legg had been hot on the search of a very fine recording off the radio that a collector had made and played for them in absolutely pristine sound. But as soon as they started talking about releasing it, he disappeared, and he refused to answer letters and telegrams and so on. Now, when Dr. Gertsch, this collector in Switzerland, offered us, my German colleague Werner Unger and I, his collection to transfer in the early 1990s, we found in a box a small reel tape that included 3 minutes from the second movement of the Chopin Concerto from that Zurich concert, as well as 2 etudes that had also been on the official program. They weren't encores, but they were actually on the printed program. Lipatti played 3 solo works after intermission. And these were an absolutely flawless, high-fidelity sound. And what we suspect is that this collector had perhaps, in a sense, given a sampler of the high-fidelity tape that he'd had. So just these excerpts. And so it's really unfortunate that there is no, so far we have not yet found a pristine copy of the entire broadcast. But what I thought we might do is listen to a little bit of an excerpt from this master tape in high fidelity.
Well, with your permission, could we go to the etude directly after the romanza?
Yes, that's a good. So track 12 and then track 11.
You got it. We hear.
All right, let's listen to just the 3 minutes from the very end of the second movement, where we hear Lipatti's beautiful crystalline sonority, bell-like, glass-like sonority, which one of the music critics who reported on this concert spoke about in his critique. And then this wonderful Chopin E minor etude, Opus 25, number 5, where this long, beautiful, flowing line with these cascading arpeggios in the middle section is just exquisitely beautiful.
Well said. Let's hear it.
Thank you.
From the Zurich Tonhalle, we heard Dinu Lipatti with Otto Ackermann doing an excerpt from the Romanza movement of the Chopin Concerto No. 1 in E minor, Opus 11, and then the Etude in E minor, Opus 25, No. 5 by Frédéric Chopin, once again by Dinu Lipatti, but not part of the Lipatti canon. Once again, thank you to Mark Ainley. Mr. Ainley.
Well, I mean, really, spectacular playing, and I think those are the highest fidelity recordings that we've got of Lipatti, where we can really hear so much of his nuancing. There are moments where I think you can hear the piano bench creaking. It's really magnificent playing, so we can just hope that a complete recording of that concert in such high fidelity sound is found. But now we're moving on into a completely different direction, also in Zurich in 1947. Lipatti was very good friends with the cellist Antonio Janigro, and they were touring Switzerland in 1947 playing Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms sonatas to great acclaim. And Lipatti somehow talked Walter Legg into making some trial recordings at a Zurich studio, and they recorded 6 78 sides of various works, including the first movement of Beethoven's Third Cello Sonata. Now, it's quite a famous sort of fact that Lipatti recorded no Beethoven. And yet, 20 years after I started looking for these recordings, I finally, through Janigro's daughter, connected with a student of Janigro's in Germany, and he had the cellist's own test pressings. And so managed to get a copy, and we're going to hear an excerpt of this Beethoven Third Sonata, Opus 69.
What can I say, except that I wished we had the entire recital, which included, I believe, Brahms and another cello sonata. I don't recall which.
A Bach cello sonata.
The Bach cello sonata. Well, here we are. An excerpt from the Sonata No. 3, Opus 69 of Ludwig van Beethoven, Antonio Janigro, cello. The pianist is the rare Dinu Lipatti. Likely the rarest Lipatti you're ever going to hear. The music of Beethoven from the Opus 69 Cello Sonata in A with Antonio Janigro and Dinu Lipatti playing that excerpt. Well, Mr. Ainley, of course, that's going to become a hot potato.
It's pretty amazing stuff, isn't it? So the last one, do we have time for our last selection?
We have time for the Schubert.
Okay, so what we're going to hear is now another rarity in a sense. When Lipatti played his last recital in Besançon, he played all of the works, he played the same Bach partita, Mozart sonata, and Chopin waltzes that he'd recorded in the studio a couple of months earlier, rather. But he also played 2 Schubert impromptus. Now, when EMI released the record, one of the things that startled listeners was that we can hear this applause as Lipatti walks to the stage, and then we hear these warm-up arpeggios before the Bach and the Mozart, which is something that's rarely captured on record, this form of preluding, it was called, where pianists would warm up and play a few notes or transition the keys between works. And yet, for some reason, they did not release the arpeggios before the Schubert and the Chopin. But these do exist, and I got a copy from the Radio France broadcast. And so what I thought we would do is hear what I think is the highlight of Lipatti's last recital, a beautiful reading of the G-flat impromptu with, probably for the first time on an American broadcast, the warm-up arpeggios that Lipatti plays at the beginning.
Just prior to playing this recording, which will be the last for the evening of our tribute, I'd just like to read you from your own notes to the Besançon final recital for Opus Cura, a label for which I myself have written. The recording as released is not complete. As stated, a recording of Lipatti's unsuccessful attempt at playing the A-flat waltz and the final Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring has not yet been found. Documentary film producer Philippe Roger has, however, fortunately located some unreleased portions of the recital, notably the arpeggios Lipatti played prior to performing the Schubert impromptus and Chopin waltzes. Lipatti's warm-ups to the Bach and Mozart can be heard on this CD, as well as more audience applause, and these are featured in the film. It's to be hoped that the entire recital will be found and issued as a complete CD. We're going to conclude this tribute to Dinu Lipatti with his performance of the G-flat impromptu, Opus 90, number 3, or Deutsch 899, number 3 if you prefer, from Besançon, 1950. My great regards to Mark Ainley for making this whole program possible. My regards also to Don Wright for having delivered this wonderful recording we're about to hear. From Dinu Lipatti's last recital in Besançon, 1950, we heard the Impromptu, number 3 in G-flat major, Opus 90, number 3 by Franz Schubert. My thanks to Mark Ainley. If you're still there, Mark, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And we haven't mentioned yet that, in fact, today, March 19th, is officially Lipatti's 100th birthday.
Well,
and so this has been a really wonderful way to recognize the great artistry of this pianist. So I thank you very much for inviting me and providing the opportunity to present so many fantastic recordings of this great pianist.
Well, we all thank you. And once again, I hope you'll join us at the Music Treasury. Thanks so much.
Thank you.